All right, in this video I want to go over a few things that are in sections 5.3 and 5.4. That's pages 134 to 138. And you should read these pages yourself. And of course there are exercises at the end of the chapter. There's a couple things I just want to go over quickly to help you just make sure you're on the right track right from the beginning. Okay, so first, the difference in proportions when we're looking at that. So here's the diagram from this population here. 150 people are in a drug study. Some of them have received the active agent and have high blood pressure. Some of them have received the active agent and do not have high blood pressure. And then the rest have received the placebo, and some of them have high blood pressure and some of them do not. Okay, so now when we are looking at the difference in proportions, we've got the four proportions here: 33%, 67%, 75%, and 25%. And what we want to compare are first the 67% and the 25%. So we're comparing the two proportions that are at the bottom on the left and the right, and we can also compare the two that are at the top on the left and the right, the 33 and the 75. Okay, so we're not comparing 33 and 67%, and we're not comparing 75 and 25%. All right, so why are we comparing, for instance, 67% and 25%? Well, if you think about it, the idea here, we've got a drug, I just made this up, but we've got a drug study. Let's say everyone began the study with the same blood pressure, and then they take the drug. Some people get the drug itself, and some people get the placebo. And then after a certain amount of time, we find that the people who have been taking the drug, 67% of them have high blood pressure, whereas only 25% of the people who have been taking the placebo have high blood pressure. So we want to think about 67% versus 25%. That doesn't tell us with absolute certainty, but it suggests that maybe perhaps there's something about the active agent that is causing the high blood pressure. We don't know that for certain, but we do know that in this population, having high blood pressure goes with having taken the active agent because the 67% is bigger than the 25%. Okay, then similarly for the top here, not having high blood pressure goes with having taken the placebo because the 75% is bigger than the 33%. Okay, so that's the idea. So when you're making the comparison between the proportions, you always want to go side to side. All right, next, we can talk about when there is a difference. So there isn't always going to be a difference. These two proportions could have been the same. And I think in the book on page 136, figure 5.3, there's an example there where the proportions are the same. But when the proportions are different, as they are in this population here, this diagram of the population here, then we can talk about which variables are associated. Actually, I shouldn't say it that way. So when there is a difference there, then that means that the variables themselves, which are of course treatment and blood pressure, those variables are associated. Okay, so in this population, the variables, blood pressure and treatment, are associated, but we also want to know which values are associated. Okay, so these are the values, not high blood pressure, active agent, and placebo. Okay, and so in this case, we have high blood pressure and having taken the active agent are positively associated. I'll write that down. Okay, then at the same time, high blood pressure and taking the placebo are negatively associated. When we look at these two proportions here, we see that high blood pressure has a tendency not to go with having taken the placebo as compared to having taken the active agent. So high blood pressure and placebo are negatively associated. All right. Then the last thing I want to show you, just quickly, once we have those positive and negative associations, and these are just two, there's also two more. If we look at not having high blood pressure is positively associated with the placebo, and not having high blood pressure is negatively associated with the active agent. Did I say that right? So the first one, not having high blood pressure is positively associated with the placebo. Not having high blood pressure is negatively associated with the active agent. Okay, then the last thing, and this is on page 137, and there's also a good example on the top of 138 there, is the strength of these positive and negative associations. And this is not very, there are more complex ways of getting a value here, but this is a pretty simple one. So all we have to do, following what's in the book, is for our positive association, we were comparing the 0.67, 67%, and the 25%, and so we just want to find the difference between them to get a value for how strongly they're positively associated. So 67%, 0.67, minus 0.25 gives us 0.42. So that's the strength of this positive association when we measure it this way, using the difference in proportions. Okay, then let's see, we got our negative association is going to be similar. So to find the negative association, we were looking at these same two proportions, but we start with the smaller one. So 0.25 minus 0.67 is going to give us a negative value, negative 0.42. Okay, so that's the strength of the negative association. So this negative association between high blood pressure and taking the placebo, we're looking at the same two numbers, but we start with this one and subtract the larger one. That gives us negative 0.42. Okay, then just to finish, I'm not going to write it all out, but this other population that we looked at in previous video. So again, if we're interested in the difference in proportions, if we're looking at the difference in proportions, we're going to be looking at the 60% and the 75%, these two, and the 40% and the 25%, these two. Okay, so again, here, if we start with not vaccinated, we've got 60% of the men in this population have not been vaccinated, 75% of the women in this population have not been vaccinated. These are the two values we want to compare, and we find that this number is bigger than this one, so we say that not vaccinated, actually I should back up a second. So there's a difference between these two. So the variables, gender and vaccination status, are associated, and the values, not vaccinated and female, are positively associated. Vaccinated and male are also positively associated because the 40% is bigger than the 25%. Not vaccinated and male are negatively associated. Again, comparing these 60% and the 75%, not vaccinated has a tendency not to go with being male as compared to being female. So not vaccinated and male are negatively associated. Okay, so that's the idea. Again, look at those 4 pages, and you've got the exercises at the end of the chapter to get you more comfortable with this.